Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Mark Pennington. I'm the head of the Department of Political Economy and also the director of the Centre for the Study of Governance and Society, which is hosting this event this evening. We're also able to host the event owing to the support of the King's Worldwide Partnership Fund, which we're very grateful for. We're delighted to have with us this evening Professor Herbert Gintis, who is Emeritus Professor of Economics at University of Massachusetts Amherst, and who also works quite extensively with the Santa Fe Institute. It's really hard to do justice to the contributions that Herbert has made. Okay, well, I will. I'm going to try. It's really hard to do justice to the contributions that Herbert has made to the study of political economy, broadly construed, and I would say to the human sciences, broadly understood. He's made major contributions in the fields of education and human capital, sociobiology, gene theory and coevolution, altruism and cooperation, epistemic game theory, to name just a few. I think what unites all of these contributions is a desire to understand the human condition in all of its varied facets. What really excites me personally about Herbert's work is the desire to formulate a unified theory of human behaviour, but one which draws on insights from right across the social sciences. Many people have, if you like, a lip service commitment to the notion of interdisciplinary work, but Herbert Gintis really does interdisciplinary. He really does it. Tonight, we're going to hear him speak about rational choice and political behaviour. So without further ado, please welcome Professor Herbert Gintis.
Thank you. It's really wonderful to be here and to see. Maybe 20 years ago, I had this vision that there would be an interdisciplinary department somewhere. And it has happened, not just here, but this is the biggest I've ever seen, actually. So I'm very pleased. I hope to say a few things that will change your life. The reason I think I might be able to is I have discovered a few things that have changed my life. And I'm not that different from you. So maybe if you hear about them, it will change your life too. Of course, I might be wrong. In case I'm wrong, please raise your hand and say you're wrong or ask for a clarification or anything. I don't have to wait for the question and answer period to take questions or even objections. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is from my most recent book, Individuality and Entanglement, which I did one book before which tried to integrate the behavioral sciences, but it was called Bounds of Reason. But what it really did was try to see what you had to do to economic theory to make it compatible with the other behavioral sciences like sociology and anthropology, etc. This book really does take on the other disciplines, everything except psychology. I'm very happy with it. And this is just one thing I'm going to talk about, which is political theory. My overall argument for many years has been there are two behavioral disciplines that have core theories that make them scientific. One is economics, and one is biology. Or even just say population biology. That is biology of behavior of organisms. And they do that because they have the rational actor model. In biology, organisms maximize something called inclusive fitness. In economics, they maximize something which you can call utility, etc. The other disciplines have no core whatever. And that's a problem because you can't build science on incremental levels, people contributing new things to other people's contributions, unless you have a core you all agree on, that you build on. Newton was once famous for saying, someone said, how could you do all this brilliant work? And he said, I stand on the shoulder of giants so I can see. But like I've noticed in sociology, very often, standard way of writing a paper about a subject is to say, everything everybody said before is wrong, and now I'm going to say what's right. And also in social psychology, it happens all the time. It's all wrong, and this is right. Well, that's not science. I don't want to curse in front of people, so I won't say it. It's scandalous. So the problem is that all of the behavioral sciences should use things like game theory and the rational actor model. Now, when I go on, you'll see there are 100 critiques of the rational actor model. They're all wrong. I've never seen a good critique of the rational actor model. They're not just wrong, they're laughable. They're just stupid. Now, that doesn't mean the rational actor model is correct, because I'm going to criticize it here, but mine's going to be right. But it is. That's the difference. And you can't do game theory unless you accept the rational actor model, because what are people doing when they're playing a game? You say, well, he rejected a positive offer in the ultimatum game. Why? Because he prefers to hurt the other guy rather than have the money. Now, if you don't have the rational actor model, you don't know why he rejected it. Well, he's just like a turnip. Turnips reject positive offers. Okay, so at any rate, I'll be talking about that. Here's a summary of my talk. And the thing about the rational actor model, which, by the way, if you have questions about, ask me, it makes a couple of very crazy mistakes that can be corrected and have to be corrected to understand human behavior. So I'm going to both support it and also show you what's wrong with it. Summary of my talk. Individuals often behave morally, not because of the consequences of their actions, but simply because it's the right thing to do. They're not doing it because it doesn't matter whether they're self-interested, whether they care about other people. It doesn't matter. They do what they think is the right thing to do, not because it helps or hurts other people. This behavior is central to the efficacy of democratic governance. Why? Well, I'll tell you why now. Because a rational, self-interested, no, it doesn't have any self-interest. A rational agent, no matter what their interests are, will never vote. A rational, whatever their interests, will never participate in the collective action. Because you can't make any difference. One person doesn't make any difference. Okay, so this non-consequentialist dimension of morality is captured by the concept of social rationality, as opposed to the private rationality of standard choice theory. Now, what is social rationality? I'm not sure. In my book, I have a chapter in which I give some tentative directions that social rationality moves in. But it's really a subject that has to be developed. Now, here's an example of social rationality, which is irrational from the point of view of rational choice theory as we know it, so-called rational choice theory. An example is the belief that one has helped a candidate for political office to win the election, even though the candidate won by many votes. If the candidate won by more than one vote, you didn't help him get elected. You might as well have stayed home. What do you mean you helped him get elected? If you had voted for the other side, he still got elected. How's that helping? Okay, so I'll deal with this. But I want to begin with an overview of the major themes of this book, and then I'll get to the specific. My overarching task is the integration of the behavioral sciences: economics, sociology, political science, anthropology, psychology. I might be missing something, I can't think about it. Into a mutually concordant whole. What that means is not that everybody learns everything and that there's one massive theory. It is wherever you have two disciplines, where they overlap, they agree. And if they don't agree, then they fight it out. And if after fighting it out they still don't agree, they should shut up about it. Because if you can't convince other scientists that your position is right, then shut up. This is what Wittgenstein once said, das, was man kann nicht sagen, darüber muss man schweigen. Whatever you can't say, shut up about. Okay? Or you can say it, but don't say it's true. Say, I think it's really interesting this and that's that. But the teachers get before students and they say, this and that as though it's true. And the student says, well, I don't really understand it, but I better learn it. And then they go and teach the same stuff to their students. At any rate, and what do I mean by a scandal? Well, I could give you 100 examples, but just one. Until the past 20 years, economists assumed all human beings were selfish, called homo economicus. They're self-interested. And by the way, you get a lot of great economics out of that. Don't criticize it. It's a good place to start, especially if you're dealing with market interactions. But it's not true. And it's not even true for market interactions, we know now. Sociologists begin by saying human beings are moral agents. And they have almost like Freud's superego and ego and all that stuff. And they have culture, which is poured into their brains through socialization. And after you're socialized to behave in a certain way, you behave that way. A totally different theory. Has nothing to do with self-interest or rationality or anything. You're socialized into a role, you play the role. And if you don't play the role, what do they call you? Deviant. Pathological. What?
Or cool.
Cool. No, they don't say cool. I didn't see that. In my book, it was pathological. Deviant. Now, how could sociology and economics both be in the same university, 2 floors apart, and believe such diametrically opposed things? And the answer is that they're socialized that way. And it's economically advantageous to do it. No, what's really going on is the disciplines developed for bureaucratic historical reasons that have really not much to do with the underlying scientific issues involved. And so people who hate math go into sociology, and people who hate bleeding hearts running around saying how unjust everything is in the world, they go into sociology. What did I say? Economics, yes. Well, this is not okay. So the reason I care about this is that basically I'm a curious person. I really want to know how the world works. I don't want to just, do what will get me the best job. Or get me the most published papers. Now, I've done pretty well, but it took me 78 years to get there, I'll tell you that. So it's hard to do, but it's really worthwhile, and that's what's going on here.
Can you incorporate ethology there?
Ethology? Yeah, I put that in anthropology. It's a form of ethology. Ethology is a methodological approach, one approach to anthropology. Okay, what about a core for political theory? What is political theory? What does it mean? Well, we know you can start with institutions and constitutions and elections and all that, but basically, what you have to understand is society, human society, is a game with rules. The rules are norms and conventions and laws or whatever it is that people use to run that society. People are the players and they have strategies in these games. And politics is the arena in which we affirm and change the rules. That's my definition. Now, unlike the rules in standard game theory, social rules are continually contested in every society. Players try to scrap old rules and create new rules to serve their purposes. In modern society, participating in a large-scale political action, which is how the rules get changed in political life, violates the standard principles of rational choice. The choice model used in economic theory and wherever, and in political theory too. Why? Because nobody makes a difference. One person doesn't make a difference in a large collective action of any force. They might as well stay home. And this does not depend how you're motivated. You could be I usually say self-regarding rather than selfish, because let me give you an example. If I were selfish, I'd still help you if you were in need, because I care about you. It makes me feel good to help you. So I don't like the word selfish. Self-regarding means I only care about what goes in and out of my orifices. And that is very different. And other regarding means I care about other people or abstract moral values. No matter what you have, any of those, standard rational choice theory says there's no reason to act on them in a large collective action of any kind. Now, where does morality come into this? Well, playing games with socially constructed rules requires a moral sense. In other words, the rules of social life are not just conventions, like drive on this side of the street or drive on that side of the street. They have some moral force. And if you have to enforce them without morality, society will never work. It can't work possibly, just based on rules. By the way, I think Max Weber, that's his biggest mistake, is to think that you can set up a bunch of rules and people will behave according to the rules and you can have a society work that way. You cannot. You cannot. Many social rules are morally binding. People gain satisfaction by playing by the rules. They're ashamed when they break the rules, and they're offended when other people break the rules. Indeed, individuals often reward others who play by the rules, and they punish others who break the rules, even at considerable personal cost and without a prospect of any personal return in the future. This is really interesting about humans. And I invented the word for this, strong reciprocity. But if you study the experimental game theory, you see it all over the place. People like to help people who are nice to them at a cost to themselves, even when there's no return for them. And they like to hurt people who hurt them, even though it hurts them, it hurts themselves. And this is, by the way, it's amusing. If you look at a sociology textbook, look in the index and see if you see the word retaliation, revenge, vindication, retribution. They're not there. Only under pathologies. You see pathologies, revenge. Pathology, retribution. Humans love to hurt people who hurt them. Go to the movies. I love the movies because you see all of life played out for an hour and a half. There are two basic kinds of movies. They're love movies and they're revenge movies. The revenge movie, Arnold Schwarzenegger is with his lovely wife and the little puppy and the kid, and they all get wiped out except him. And then you spend an hour and a half of him killing everybody in sight. And you go out and you say, that was really uplifting. Right? Or think of this. This is terrible, but your kid gets hit by a drunk driver. Kid's killed. What do? Well, what I read in the paper is you and your family go into court to make sure that son of a bitch gets put away. Now, why do you do that? Well, he might come out and hit my other kid. No, I don't have another kid. No, he probably won't hit my other kid. Why do you do that? And they ask people that. How did you feel when he was convicted? Oh, it's great. I've been working to get him convicted for a year and a half. Yeah.
Would you count such pleasure as a personal benefit? Because you thought that it's without personal benefit, but you nonetheless seem to recognize.
Yes. Yes, it's a personal benefit to hurt someone who hurts you. I mean, I'm not saying for me personally. I, in fact, don't have a lot of that feeling. And maybe it's because I've worked on it and I know how bizarre it sounds when you reveal it and you open it up. It sounds so silly, So I'm not really that way. And a lot of people aren't. This is just, you don't need to have everybody behave this way. If 10% of the population behaves this way, you can have a good social order. You do something wrong, 10 people see it, one of them is going to get you. See? But I think it's higher than 10. I would say it's about 60% of the population is this way. At any rate, if you do ask people in the United States why they went to the trial and brought their whole family, they say, well, we wanted closure. And that's the word they use. You don't say, we wanted this SOB, the slammer. We wanted closure, But it's a euphemism. It's just people like to hurt people who hurt them. In fact, some people, that's the most pleasure they get in their lives. They become school teachers. Just kidding. Just kidding. Now, what is the conclusion from this? It's very interesting. Even societies that lack government reward and punish. If you go to a hunter-gatherer society or some relatively simple society, and I've done a lot of work with these societies, that's the anthropology that I've done, there are no jails, and there are no cops, and there are no there's no judges, but they still reward and punish. And our morality, the morality of helping those who help us and punish those who violate our social laws, that probably long preceded any judges in courts in civilization. So Thomas Hobbes, I argue, was profoundly incorrect in saying that before the emergence of modern institutions, life was a war of all against all. He said before we had kings and queens, life was short and, nasty, Brutus, and short. But the anthropological evidence is not that at all. People were very happy. They lived long lives, given their technologies. Oh, they also were very violent. There's no question about that. They were very violent. But if you study the simple societies, they have very deep collective behaviors for dealing with deviance. So if you depended on government to run a society and keep it running with obeying all of the social rules, you could not have it unless people participated and agreeing with those rules and privately punishing those who violate laws without using the courts all the time. This is why dictators have such problems. They can't control their populations. You can have any law you want. You can have all the laws you want. If people don't like the laws, they don't obey them, and they don't punish those. I think it was Seneca who said, laws without morality are useless. They're useless. So, as I said, despots would love to be able to determine the moral sense of their subjects. They love to do that. The Soviet Union, all the kids went to school for 12, 15 years, and they wrote all this stuff about the heroic worker who's working for society and all this stuff. Of course, they saw the rich people running around, in their dachas and everything, and they took it with a grain of salt, And the owner of the factory says, well, I'm not driving my Porsche. I'm driving the worker's Porsche. It's the worker's Porsche. I just drive it. So, and after the Soviet Union fell, it took about 2 months for people to stop talking like that, And all of a sudden, if you study the cultural flowering or maybe crazies going on in the Soviet Union right after it fell, and it was immense. Nobody believed that stuff. Morality, in short, has a dynamic that cannot be controlled by states. New technologies may change this. Perhaps someone will develop a pill so that every morning everyone takes the pill and then they're like, master all day. There's a movie called Alphaville, which is a Godard movie, just like that. Of course, someone forgot to take their pill one day and then things went haywire. I hope that this never happens, but it might. Now, rationality in public and private spheres. Models of rational choice. Now, by the private sphere, I mean what you do in your daily life. By the public sphere, I mean what you do in a collective action, like voting in a large election or demonstrating for, social change or something like that, where there's lots of you. And I say that there are two personas. You have a private persona in your daily life, how you behave, and you have a public persona, which is how do you behave vis-a-vis voting and participating in social change, etc., etc. Now, here's the problem. Models of rational choice in the private sphere treats agents' choices as instrumental to achieving their private ends. Now, probably all of you haven't studied rational choice theory. I've, in at least 2 books, I've spent a lot of time trying to say exactly what it is, because it's so misrepresented in discussions. But basically it says something like this. Rational choices, you have a choice set of different things, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and you look at each one and you say how much you like it, and then you choose the one you like the best. Now, you have to add a few things to that, but that's basically what it says. And you choose the one which will help you most, or whatever your goals are. You might save the whales, you might care about, anything, yourself, your family, your country, whatever you care about, doesn't matter. You act to achieve it. And by the way, this does not depend on whether you're selfish, whether you care about others, or you just have a set of universal moral principles, Kantian-type principles. Behavior in the public sphere, however, is largely non-instrumental because it is non-consequential. Individuals as voters in large elections or participants in large collective actions have a vanishingly small effect on outcomes. Now, I call agents whose behavior in the public sphere is non-consequential, that is, people who vote or participate, not as leaders, but as followers. Not people who run for office, but people who vote for people who run for office. Canonical participants, that's almost all of us. Canonical participants make no difference to outcomes, much as single molecules in a gas make no difference in the properties of the gas. Okay? If you study the physics, thermodynamics, every molecule has no effect on the whole, absolutely zero. Now, of course, you can say that it's 10 to the minus 25th if you want, but it just muddies the water because it makes it more complicated, and in fact, one molecule doesn't matter. Same thing with collective actions. Yes, of course, I can say, for instance, my talk now could depend on the cosmic rays coming from Sagittarius constellation, but not much. And probably, if it knocks me off the chair, tell me. So you ignore it. That's what science is. You ignore things that don't matter. And individual participants do not determine outcomes if they're canonical participants. So I have to extend the rational actor model to the behavior of these participants. And I'm not going to tell you how I do it right now. I want to give more examples of it. You can read my book and figure out how I deal with this. Or I will later in the talk. I apply this model to explain why collective action is generally motivated by violations of principles of procedural justice. Okay? In other words, when people enter into a collective action, even voting, they are doing so not as individuals. They cannot make individual differences because they're infinitesimal, but they're motivated by the moral implications of the things that they love and they support and that they hate and they want to change. They do not participate generally because they care about the social outcomes or that they even know what the social outcomes might be. So, for instance, economists are very upset that people vote for things that lower the rate of growth of the country, that extend poverty, or they inhibit mobility. But people don't care about Gini coefficients, generally. They don't care about degrees of inequality, generally. They care about violations of justice. This is a major claim. I may be wrong sometimes. I haven't found a counterexample yet. Economic efficiency and social equality are not procedural principles. They're abstractions. Voters do not prioritize economic efficiency or social equality, generally. If they can fit it into a justice framework, then they can. If you can say, well, there's not only a lot of inequality, it's unjust. It's unjust that it's this way, yes.
Well, why do you call this is violations of principles of procedural justice? I think inequality and economic efficiency, social equality is distributive justice.
Well, yes, but if you can convince people of a concept of distributive justice, then it can turn into a political an effective way to organize collective action. Often it's very difficult to describe to most people what distributive justice means. They know in their daily life, justice means no one took your wallet today, and your kids came home from school without, being bullied, etc., etc. Distributive justice is a very, theoretical, philosophical term, which is very nice, but it's not part of people's daily lives. So what I'm saying is it's very hard to organize around that. And if you try, you're probably going to fail. And that's why I think a lot of the failure of the left today in the United States and probably elsewhere is that they moved from a notion of injustice, exploitation. For instance, the working class is exploited. That's very clear. The bosses are there and hammering on the workers, and the workers are, they're the losers. And we're going to change that. We're going to make the workers run everything. Okay? That's real justice. And if you're a worker, maybe you felt that. You felt whoever loved his boss. I don't know if I've found anybody yet, except my wife. And after the decline of the workers' movement, the left moved towards this abstract idea of distributive justice, which they all can understand because you go to college and you take 6 courses on it, and you all talk to each other, and you all understand it. But it doesn't mean anybody. Think of the man in the street or the woman in the street. It doesn't mean any. It's not injustice. For instance, during the financial crisis in 2008 in the United States, a lot of my leftist friends blamed it on the bankers. Well, they didn't do anything. In a minute. They didn't do anything. When they had, what did they call it, the Wall Street marches? I forget. They were against the, what? Occupy Wall Street. If you ask the people who were demonstrating there, they couldn't even say what the bankers did was wrong. They had no idea what the alternative. What is the alternative? And it died. The movement died completely. It was a waste of time. Let me just finish this point, okay? I'll take it. This was a mistake of the left because what you have to deal with is real injustice. And for instance, predatory states are really unjust. And discrimination is really unjust, etc. And you can do that. But distributive justice, it's not a principle of justice that's easily disseminated. Yeah.
So I think it's fundamentally true what you're saying. For 80-90% of people, justice is very visceral and really affects your day-to-day life, and it's very black and white, right? But at the same time, we're moving into an era where you have what is called algorithmic truth.
Excuse? Alternate truth?
Algorithmic truth.
What does?
Algorithmic.
Algorithmic truth?
Yeah, so what I mean...
I don't know that.
So what I mean by that is that there are, with the rise of blockchain technologies and with the rise of distributed networks, the idea of one person determining what is fair on their behalf is starting to rise. So I think that perhaps...
Yes, that could be a form of injustice on which people would organize. Because, I went to get my kid into a certain school and they wouldn't let him in because he was a B positive blood type or something. You say, well, this is not right. That would fit. Algorithmic justice, or algorithmic injustice, you might say. Here's once I said this, I really liked it, so I'm repeating it. The robber barons. Now, if you study U.S. economic history, the robber barons were the Carnegies and the railroad magnates of the early 19th century. They were called robber barons, and they were hated, but not because they were barons, not because they were rich, but because they were robbers. People understand robbers, okay? And they fight against robbers. But they don't mind rich people. Rich people are just fine. Everybody loves the king and the queen and the great athletes and everybody and they don't even mind the rich idle. I mean, there are whole television channels where you can watch rich people eat out of, drink champagne out of glass ice containers. And people love it. They don't say, I should have that. That should be mine. I mean, I find it disgusting. But, some people like that. Now, let me just continue, if this isn't mind-blowing enough. Estimates of the probability that a single voter's decision will determine the outcome of a large election are much less than 1 in 10 million. In Canada, Great Britain, and Australia, and the United States, should have an S there, sorry, no election in which more than 40,000 votes were cast has ever been decided by a single vote. Not one. Which means that no single individual over that period in these countries has ever mattered. Not a single one has ever mattered. Any single person could have done the opposite of what they did, and the outcome would have been exactly the same for thousands of elections over 150 years. And yet, people think that they're doing something when they vote. What do they think they're doing? Well, let me finish first. There is no loss in accuracy in modeling voting behavior in large elections as purely non-consequential. As soon as somebody... I'll go on with this. Okay? But before I do, I want to talk about something that the rational actor model doesn't handle, but is central to our lives. See? It's not peripheral. Sometimes people say, well, the philosophers debate whether people are selfish or they're altruistic and this and that. There's no debate. Democratic societies run, and they run because people do not conform to the rational actor model in the public sphere. They just do not, because it doesn't matter what you do. It's non-consequential. And non-consequential public sphere activities are at the center of modern societies. Of course, voting, but it's not only voting. People not only vote, they try to figure out who to vote for. They spend a lot of time listening to and reading the newspaper and talking to friends, and they go to the ballot box and they know who to vote for. Why bother? You're not going to make any difference. You can't change the outcome. I mean, I'm going to go home. My wife voted yesterday. She said, I was so happy I voted against that. Well, never mind. And I said, well, I'll be home, and I can go and vote too. I will vote too, and I will feel good, checking this and checking that. And I know it won't matter. I know that I'm not going to change the outcome. Modern liberal democracy of the kind that we live in was achieved through collective actions over centuries. Those of you who have studied history know. The peasants fought for freedom, and the levelers and the workers fought for democracy to get the vote, and women fought to get the vote, and minorities fought to get the vote, and they fought for representative government, and they died for it. It's not like it was given to us by the kings and the queens. They fought for it all over Europe and the US and other countries. And all over the world now. We had the Arab Spring, but of course the Arab Spring was motivated by the preferences of urbanites, and the rural classes really were not in tune with that. But everything that makes us a species, modern civilization, is the product of behaviors that you never learned why it happened. Because you learn the rational actor model, or you learn nothing. No, I'm just going over it again. The reason I go over this so many times is people don't really understand it at first. Because you keep slipping. I kept slipping personally back into thinking in terms of individual votes matter. It took me about 2 years before I totally got that out of my head. However, canonical participants consider their behavior as rational, goal-oriented behavior. If I say this to people, they basically disagree with me. They say they're rational for voting. I've done this. If you ask people in a queue at the polling booth why they are standing there, what do you think they say? If you ask people why they're protesting political corruption, why they're chanting and holding signs, what do you think they say? They think the question's absurd. Now you know why they're there. They're there to register their support for candidates or to help topple a corrupt government. That's why they're there. They say that. Okay, then I say, consider canonical participant Alice. And I say to Alice, your personal contribution will make no difference to the outcome. Whatever you do, the outcome will be the same with probability so high that, you're more likely to die now by melting like the drummer of in a famous short video than you are to change the outcome of this election. Alice will likely respond that you are guilty of faulty reasoning. Why? If she's really smart, which a lot of people are. Because if everyone followed your reasoning, no one would vote. And no one would fight to topple corrupt regimes. So you must be wrong in that reasoning. The reasoning that one vote doesn't matter must be wrong. Because if everybody believed that, you couldn't have society. So it must be wrong. Now, when I first figured that out, I said, I'm going to have to reread Kant. This does sound like Kant. And it is. I misunderstood Kant for a long time. Everybody now is going around saying, oh, mea culpa, I'm a bad person. I was a bad person. Well, mea culpa, I didn't understand Kant. Now, it's not all my fault. You can go to sleep really easy trying to read Kant in bed before nighttime. It's really, and people misunderstand them all the time. For instance, I learned that Kant said that if you do an act that's good, a good act, because it makes you feel good, then it's not a moral act. It's only a moral act if it's a duty. You have to do it. Well, he's much smarter than that. He didn't say that. What he said was, lots of times people do things simply because it's the right thing to do. And that is the distinction of human morality. Doing things because it's the right thing to do. Animals help other animals, even other species sometimes. But there's no indication that there's a moral rule that they think that they're doing it and getting pleasure out of it because it's a moral thing. They get pleasure out of it because probably it makes them feel good to help the other person or the other animal. At any rate, we can go on here. Okay. Now I go back to Alice and I say, yeah, I get your point. If everybody thought that, then we couldn't run society, but everybody doesn't think that. Why do you do it given you think everybody's going to think it if you think it? No. If you change your behavior, everybody else is still going to do the same thing. So why do you come and vote when you know that you can't make a change in the outcome? Even change other people's behavior? And Alice responds cogently that this reasoning is equally faulty because if everyone thought that way, we still couldn't run a democratic society. If everybody thought, I don't have to vote even though everybody else is voting because I can't change any of the outcomes, including whether or not they vote, no, then nobody would vote again. And you can actually carry that down recursively to infinity, probably. I stopped at 7. So there's a certain Kantian morality associated with collective actions, including voting. That's my argument. Now, if you read the political literature, some people, you'll see these, people vote because it's a duty. They think it's a duty to vote. And I think that's wrong. People don't think it's a duty to vote. And even if they did, that doesn't explain why they would become politically sophisticated, why they would learn who to vote for. And it wouldn't even really explain why they vote when they get in the voting booth. I mean, there are all sorts of crazy explanations of why people vote that try to make it consequential, but they don't work. I'll get back to them. You can ask me if you have questions. Conclusion. Human morality has an important non-consequential dimension. Individuals generally do the right thing when they do the right thing, not because of the personal social consequences of their actions, but because they believe it's the right thing to do. This is why in traditional societies, even if they're democratic, people often make voting choices or support institutions that really hurt them. They really hurt them. but they believe it's the right thing to do. And there's no choice theory that I know of that explains this. This has nothing to do with being altruistic or being selfish or any of that stuff. If it's non-consequential, there's no choice theory I know that handles it. But anyway, let me just a little more. I am honest when I am honest, not simply because I care about the people whom I interact with, although I may care about them. I'm honest because I may be afraid to be caught cheating. That's not why I'm honest, though. I'm honest because it's good to be honest. I'm also afraid to be caught, and I also may care about the other person, although on the other hand, I may not like the other person at all. People are often honest with people they don't like at all. They don't care about, or they think are strange and weird, or whatever. If you're an honest person, that affects what you do. By the way, being honest, if you look at the experimental literature, it's absolutely beautiful. People will pay to be honest in an experimental game, but they won't pay an infinite amount to be honest. If you raise the cost of being honest, fewer people are honest. It's just like economic theory. Raise the price of cheese, people eat less cheese. They still value cheese, but now the price is higher, so they eat less of it. They still value honesty, but the price is too high, so I'm going to lie. Yeah, I know.
So I appreciate we're not here to discuss information theory or...
You have to speak louder because there's lots of people can't hear you.
I can hear myself.
Can you?
Yes. So I appreciate that we're here not to talk about information theory, but it just made me think about why is it that people choose something because it's the right thing to choose, and I'm just putting it out there that it might be because intelligent systems cannot function without the ability to classify reality.
What do you mean by intelligent system? You mean a human being?
Yes.
Yes?
Today, yes. So human beings, which are intelligent, wouldn't be able to really cope with reality or with information without having reference systems that help them classify reality in a consistent manner. And hence, what is good is actually just an ultimate category that helps them classify behavior.
This is very, very interesting, but very abstract. For instance, when I'm in an airport and I don't know where I am, and I stop someone and say, "Where is aisle C?" and they stop what they're doing and they tell me where aisle C is, they're helping me because they think it's the right thing to do. I don't think you need any big classifications for stuff like that. And by the way, most of the helping and hurting, they're visceral. You can read online, a woman, I read just a couple of weeks ago, a woman wrote, she said, "I had my iPhone stolen from my house. Guy stole my iPhone. And the insurance company paid me and gave me a new iPhone. But I looked on eBay and I found someone selling my iPhone. And I went over to where he lived and I called the police and I got them to arrest this guy." Now, this is very visceral. This guy hurt me. I don't care whether I was paid back. He violated me and I'm going to hurt him. I don't think it needs very big categories for that. You know what I mean? These are moral choices, but they're very visceral choices. Think in the U.S., same-sex marriage. I'm perfectly happy with same-sex. I don't care who marries whom. Who cares? But a lot of people really care. I care a lot about soft-boiled eggs. I hate soft-boiled eggs. But I let other people eat them because I'm a good person, All this is very visceral. It's not, by the way, I should say, I will probably mention it later, but it's getting late. What I call morality is not what philosophers do. It has nothing to do with what is the right morality or how do we characterize correct morality. It's not like virtue theory of Aristotle or like Kantian, deontological or utilitarian. It's what people actually do. If it were another species like ducks, if they had some morality, I would say, what is duck morality? I'd study it as a scientist. That's what I'm doing. And I don't think I think it's ingrained in us how we behave. By the way, you can go to a very simple society where they don't wear much clothes and they can't count beyond 3, and in about 6 hours, you're just as happy as a clam there. You know how to behave. They behave the same way you behave. Now, certain things you don't want to do, you can violate some norm and some god is really angry at you, maybe that. But there are differences in culture, but they're really quite minor. Human beings all over the world are pretty much the same. And when the reason we think they're not is because we find a couple of things that they disagree on, like whether you should behead this guy or not. Like, daily life is not involved with beheading people very often, but there are extremes that we take so seriously. Like, well, they don't treat women right in this society. Okay, but they do everything else pretty much the way you do. You have to understand that we're all one species and only differ on very cutting-edge things. I'm trying to minimize those. They're very important. But you should note that people have basic underlying human traits that are very universal. Okay, so I've done that. Now, what I'm trying to talk about here's the problem. If I try to describe what I just said to you about non-consequential behavior to an audience that was unsophisticated, and I've done that, that is people who haven't studied a lot of social theory, they don't understand what I'm talking about. They don't understand a thing I'm talking about. Of course I helped to win the election. I voted for the right guy. That's helping to win the election. Yeah, I'm not saying it isn't. But I want you to understand that the social theory that's supposed to explain that is completely incapable of explaining it. What do you mean when you say you helped win something when your vote didn't matter? I mean, you mean something. So I develop in my book the notion of, first of all, one of the second problem with the rational actor model is the so-called subjective prior. Everybody has a set of subjective beliefs that are their personal beliefs, and that influences their choices. And I argue that that's really not true. People don't have subjective priors. They have entangled minds. Everything you believe is a product of your interaction with a network of minds, socially organized and structured network of minds. And our minds work with a form of causal efficacy that is socially rational if you're a member of a group of network minds. Now, my wife says, I helped my candidate win. Why? Because I'm just one of all these people I'm networked with who hate Donald Trump or whatever. And that's what my rationality is. I'm not being altruistic in this. I am just part of a networked group who behave this way because that's what we think is right. Even though you can't explain it according to, and you say, I said, but to my wife, but your vote doesn't matter because you win or lose. Well, think of Alice that I interviewed in the queue. She says that's ridiculous. So I never say that anymore to her. And I don't mean it. I do mean that she's rational for voting. And I vote, and I respect people who vote. But you need to have a different theory of how people are networked, not just minds, but what they read and where they go and all sorts of things. So when someone, for instance, says, well, I believe, and then they say some outlandish religious thing, like, I believe you should wear a hat that's 5 feet high. Where I live in Brooklyn, there are people that go around with these hats 5 feet high. I believe that's the right way to live. Why do you believe that? Well, God says that's the right way to live, and all my friends live that way. And, I say, well, fine, any way you want. The point is that certainty about certain things occurs not because of some generalized universal truth, but because the minds with which you are networked all agree on that, or so closely all agree on it, that you take it as just as confident as anything in your life. You believe it just as strongly as anything else in your life. And this is the nature of entangled minds. And I call this distributed effectivity. That means you feel effective in what you're doing, even though you don't make a difference. And you're effective because you're one of a set of a constellation of networked minds, of cognition distributed across many people, that renders your behavior effective as a part of a networked structure. Okay. Now, am I doing okay? You want to stop for questions now? Otherwise, I'm just going to be saying more of the same, I think.
We've got half an hour for questions, so I think it might be a good time to take questions, if that's all right.
Thank you for your lecture, but I think some really evil persons, such as Adolf Hitler or Osama bin Laden, they also have some, I think, non-consequential thoughts. Or So how? But we cannot tell their behavior as morality, their thoughts as morality.
Why? You don't agree with it. That's all.
I don't agree with their beliefs.
No, I don't. But I call it moral.
Yeah.
If you have a moral belief that leads you to kill people that I love, I say you're immoral. But immorality is morality.
Yeah.
The only thing that's not morality are choices you can explain on basis of instrumental, something or other.
Yeah. I think they have their moral beliefs, but how can we make difference between their moral beliefs and our moral beliefs using your framework?
It's very easy. If I don't like your moral beliefs, I don't like you, and I'm going to try to make my moral beliefs salient. I'm trying to destroy you. I mean, there's some moral beliefs I don't care about, like if you like to eat certain foods or wear certain dress or all of that. But if you're a Hitler or Bin Laden or Stalin or something like that, then I want to fight you. I think you have wrong moral beliefs, and we fight about it. I don't see what the problem is. Morality doesn't mean that everyone's good according to you.
All right. So just a bit of background about myself. I work with tech companies, and one of a tech company,
An asset company, yes.
Technology company. Yes, I'm sorry. So the question that I have is, we are looking to collect data about behaviors, and based on this data, we want to make sure that we have the fairest possible model of our customers and users. And my concern is that model is closer to average behavior, and I'm concerned that average is not morally correct, or it's not ethically. Sure. So what is your recommendation on this? How do you escape the curse of average? How do you escape that?
Well, first of all, if you're working for a company and your clients have certain ends they want to meet, and you're saying that the best way to meet those ends is morally wrong, I don't know. I would not work for them. Seriously. Because, it's not fair to impose your morality on them. Just don't work for them. I mean, often young people say, well, what shall I do as an academic or a scientist? Should I work on this project or that project? And I say, well, do what makes you happy. It's your whole life. Don't do what you think you should do for, some reason. You just do what you want to do, So I'm saying that to you. I think that's the right way to live your life. You just, keep away from things that you think are morally reprehensible, Now, it may not be possible.
No, I didn't mean that, Professor.
But you say you come out for the average. But is that, in fact, the best thing for a firm?
Yeah, that's my question. I don't know.
Yeah, no, well, usually, I can give you a half a dozen people at the Santa Fe Institute who will tell you that the average is not good, that you should have a lot of diversity in order to, have creativity in a group. Scott Page wrote a whole book about this, the benefits of diversity for creativity. So then you have to tell your employer or your client that they're wrong to want average. They're wrong to want everybody to agree with each other, etc. You want outliers who don't. But I don't see a moral problem with that. And they may disagree with you, so they'll hire somebody else to do their work.
Okay, thanks very much. So I'm very much in agreement with most of what you've been saying, but I'd like to ask you about another variation of the response that you get from the Alice in the queue, right? Because I've been round and round with friends of mine, right? So you can do it with voting, vegetarianism, climate change, right? These collective action problems, people will say to you, oh, but if everybody thought like that, blah, 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 and they go down that. But there's another response, which is you say it makes no difference, right? But that can't be true because the very fact that all of these actions sum together clearly has an outcome. They backwards infer that in fact it must make a difference. It's very, very small, but it must be a difference, right? Yeah. Now, I personally think that we're just stuck in a paradox there, that our brains can't get our heads around this problem. But why, and your idea of entangled minds, I find really persuasive as to what people think they're doing when they engage in collective action. But is it not also the fact that that there's something in our brains that requires a lot of philosophical reasoning to disentangle these things that's also going on?
Absolutely. First of all, there are studies by political scientists, because one of the explanations of why people vote is they're just stupid. They don't know that it doesn't count. But if you do a survey of people, you'll find that the people who vote the most also are most likely to believe that their vote doesn't count. They'll just say it doesn't count. I know the people who don't vote will say voting counts, I just don't feel like it because I don't care about the candidates or something. So, in fact, the people who vote know that their vote doesn't count. That argument, some people may make it, but plenty of people vote who know it won't count. Now, why would people make that argument? Well, people love cognitive consonance. And people will buy cognitive consonance at very high cost. When I was very young, when I was a student in college, I learned in my psychology course about this experiment where they used hypnotism, and they would tell the subject, when you wake up, you will believe you just got back from a vacation in Puerto Rico. Didn't happen. And they wake them up, and they say, well, how have you been? I haven't seen you for a while. Oh, yeah, I had a vacation in Puerto Rico. Oh, really? Well, you don't have a tan. Oh, well, it rained almost every day. On and on, Because, when you ask people why they do X, they don't explain why, they justify why. They need a justification for it. And this works in the sciences too, there are 1,000 papers explaining how a rational actor might vote. They're all completely outlandish because it does come out to be 1 in 10 million. But you can still say, well, people really care about, they're worried that their neighbors will frown on them if they don't vote. Really? I don't know a neighbor might have voted or not. I don't care whether my neighbors vote. There's not even it's not even a norm to say that you're a bad person if you don't vote. Lots of people don't vote. So there are all sorts of and again, it's cognitive consonance that you want. And what I'm doing here is saying, forget it. It's just like the constellation Sagittarius might affect my behavior, but it doesn't affect my behavior. Let's forget about it. So I think that's mostly what's going on. They don't want to think about it. By the way, the same thing goes on in physics and chemistry. I don't know chemistry, but I do know physics pretty well. If you ever study quantum mechanics, if you want to know weird, try quantum mechanics. That's about as weird as you can get. Richard Feynman, the great physicist once said, anybody who says he understands quantum mechanics is lying, because nobody can understand it. But there are 1,000 papers written to explain why it's true. Multiple universes. Every time a atom disintegrates into another, the whole universe splits into two universes. And so there are millions and trillions of universes going on. And you think nobody believes that? More than 50% of physicists say that's what they believe. Right? I mean, and I could give you other equally crazy explanations. There's this thirst for understanding. And mostly thirst for justifying whatever you happen to believe at the present time without having to, learn more stuff. I love quantum mechanics because I know that there's some deep reality not expressed in it. By the way, that's what Einstein said in 1935. He said there's some defect with quantum mechanics. So that's what I think is going on. People don't really believe that. The real truth is we vote because we're moral agents and we're part of groups.
Hi, Herbert. I have two more mundane questions, actually, two big pictures questions. So the first one is about your idea of interdisciplinary integration. And I was wondering whether you could tell us a little more about that. Namely, what do you mean? Is it just a compatibility between the findings of different disciplines? What is more than just mere compatibility that you would like to build into this idea of integration?
Yeah. Well, I'll get back to you. Let me do one at a time, okay? Just compatibility of the findings would be okay with me. But that's not what really is going on. What it turns out, if you look at the work that we've done in behavioral game theory, it doesn't just, it changes the axioms underlying the theories. You have to change the basic theories to make them compatible. It would be nice if you could just talk about make sure the outcomes are compatible. But it turns out you can't. You have to go deep into the principles of the theories in order to make them compatible. So that's why you can spend a whole book the way I did in Bounds of Reason saying, what do you have to do to economic theory to make it compatible with sociology and anthropology, etc.? And a lot of it is very basic. For instance, I take the rational actor model, look at the ways I've changed it in my talk. Well, you need social rationality, not personal rationality. You need to get rid of the subjective prior and replace it with an entangled, distributed effectivity. These are very deep, and you need that to put the things together. It's like, to put sociology together with economics, you have to change the basic axioms of economics. And similarly, sociology. Sociologists do not like to talk about incentives. That sounds like economics. You can read whole sociology books to find out what people do. Why do they do it? Well, they're socialized to do it. No incentives. And now they realize there are incentives, but that's not what they... So I think the task is an incredibly difficult theoretical task to make disciplines compatible with each other. It's never just that the outcomes are compatible.
Yeah, and the second question was about the scientific status or the alleged scientific status of rational choice theory. I mean, I can see how many people would recognize that the framework is incredibly flexible and it has a great unifying power, but many people criticize rational choice theory, for instance, for being non-falsifiable, and the falsifiability for many is one of the hallmarks of a true science. What would be your take on that? Thanks.
The reason it's non-falsifiable is because it's true. That's why you're not going to find... No, sometimes it's wrong. We know that it's wrong. How can you say it's non-falsifiable when you have the Ellsberg paradox, the LA paradox? You have... Well, those are the two most important that I know of. They show that rational choice theory is wrong. It does not apply to those things. Show me something else it doesn't apply to. I'll tell you, risk theory, if you do economics, the state of risk theory and the expected utility theorem are very shaky. They don't read. Now, I just came from Leicester, University of Leicester, where Sanjit Dami wrote a book this thick on behavioral, a textbook on behavioral economics. And he's got a whole chapter on the problems with with expected utility theory, with graphs and, dozen experiments. Of course, it's wrong. We know it's wrong. But it's not wrong about everything. It's like your Google map. You use it, but take it easy, okay? If it tells you to go into a river, don't do it. There's something wrong with it. And that's by the way, I had arguments about Popper, because I don't like Popper's falsifiability criterion, because when you have complex systems, you can have things that are, and even in physics, you can have models which work really well in some cases, but in other cases, they don't work at all. So, this is a case where we know the theory is falsifiable because it's false in some cases. Okay, now actually I was informed that what Popper really said is not a theory has to be falsifiable, but it has to be falsifiable in principle somehow. And like religion is not falsifiable in principle because you can't even in principle find anything that would falsify it. I think that's false. When God comes down and taps you on the shoulder, says, "Hey, you better eat this," I'll say, well, that other religion is then false. Of course, I have to be sure this is the only God. So at any rate, I don't like any of that stuff. The fact is, rational choice theory is very good to start with, but it has mistakes, and we have to move on to better theories that do where it fails. The people who critique rational choice theory want to throw the whole thing out. And what they get is Dreck, which is a German word, I think. Crap.
Okay, so, thanks for the great talk. So I agree with you that a single person's vote does not affect or infinitesimally affects the outcome of an election. However, I think what matters is that other people believe that it affects the outcome, and the other people accept that. And that's what I derive my utility from. So I think this is still compatible with individual irrational behavior.
Well, all I can say is read the chapter in my book. This is a common, this is like, people are just, this is called the monster fallacy theory of society. Everybody believes something that's really stupid, and that's why society works. You see this all the time. I mean, in biology, too, they do that. You say something which is wrong, but everybody believes it, and therefore things work. Now, I don't believe that at all. First of all, people don't all believe that. They don't all. My wife, when she says she makes a difference, she doesn't mean she thinks she's going to be a pivotal voter. She doesn't think her vote is going to be the one that turns the election in one direction versus the other. She means what I described in terms of distributed effectivity, when you have distributed minds, distributed cognition. So it's not a mistake. I didn't say my wife is making a mistake. She is right. That's what social rationality is for humans. Okay, it's not a mistake. There's nothing in my life that's been more important than collective actions. When I was young, I'm out there in the South, registering voters, and I participated in anti-war movements and get arrested, and all. That is a great thing to do. It's not a mistake. And I know that my behavior didn't matter. I was just one person, and not many. Human beings like to behave this way. Now, if you ask them rationally, if you ask them scientifically, why do you behave this way, they're not going to be able to answer that. Because I didn't understand it myself until I had studied this stuff for about 40 years. How do you expect people just to automatically, it's because we have distributed effectivity and there has to be minds and blah, blah. They're going to say, you're crazy, man. Just get away from me. Just give me a break.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think there's something to this non-consequentialist dimension. However, I think that perhaps you understate the range of various private benefits that people do get from taking part in collective action, for example. Having observed people at voting booths, for example, you see that old ladies gain tremendous pleasure and satisfaction from casting their vote, and also taking part in demonstrations can be a great bonding experience socially. And so at least there's a wide range of these which perfectly fit within to sort of a utility maximizing model. So
I have no problem with the utility maximizing model. I think people vote because it makes them, that's the way they maximize their utility.
Sure. But the entangled minds hypothesis perhaps doesn't need to get into this yet at this level. Perhaps there's a way in which it does, but you don't need that to explain much of a collective action, for example.
Well, I disagree, but I've explained why. I know that there are other motives. There's a classic movie, I forget about the where a guy is getting kicked out of the movie industry in the United States because he participated in a communist demonstration. He's blackballed, and this was Zero Mostel, who was a famous actor, died a few years ago. And his defense was, I don't know from communism, there was this cute broad there, and I wanted to date her, And if you go and read the women's march to Versailles during the French Revolution, they actually had people out there asking the women, what are you doing here? And someone says, I don't know, I came with my friend over there. Another one said, they paid me to come here. The third one says, they had 100 different reasons. So I understand that there are others. But still, for most people in general, they vote because they think it's the right thing to do. And for the groups they tend to support. And they get pleasure out of doing that. I personally find it a total drag. But I do it. Because I would feel even worse if I didn't. That's good Kant. The good Kantian does things because they feel worse if they didn't do it.
So is your idea of collective action simply something like an aggregation of individual actions? Is it lots of people have the same, similar moral frameworks and they vote together? Because I'm thinking of, there's a different way of looking at collective action, which is what is important about it is the fact it is collective. For example, if you look at... if you look at Rousseau, he's quite clear that collective action isn't an aggregate. Rousseau, the idea of, or if you look at Hannah Arendt's views of collective action, action is collective precisely because it's lots of people doing things together. Now, say the march here on Saturday, is that important because it's like people with similar moral views coming together, or is it important?
Oh, yeah, I read about that. It was huge.
The question is using that as an example.
Yeah, that's a good example of collective action.
Yeah, but is it important because it's actually lots of people thinking that they are acting together? Right. Yes, but that's somewhat different from saying it's an aggregation of different views of people's moral perspectives. It's people actually, it's like Hannah Arendt's thing on revolutions. It's where people act together.
Yes.
And
that's what a collective action is. If they're not acting together, they just, they interfere with each other and don't produce an outcome. They have to be acting in the same direction.
Yes, but I'm trying to get at, is it important because it's these people acting and they recognise that that's what they're doing?
Yes, they recognise that that's what they're doing. They recognise that they are there acting together. By the way, there's a whole school of philosophy based on the notion of joint action. Okay, I don't want to go through all the people, but it's very important that humans can understand that they're acting they can understand what the other person is doing because they see that they're doing something in conjunction. Tomasello is a behavioral primatologist who's worked on this with humans and primates to the same end. Primates usually, with there's more than two, they don't understand that they could work together. Humans, even from infancy, they can understand triads, and they work together. But yes, of course, collective action is working together to produce an end. And even voting, which sounds like it's totally, unorganized, it's working together because you're in the voting booth and you're doing something you think is the right thing for everybody like you to do. You're working in the same direction. And if I had time, I would have given you examples of the social rationality of voting. You know, things like when the stakes are higher for an election, there are more people vote. When the underdogs tend to vote more than the expected winners. The difference between majority rule and parliamentary depend on the votes, how people vote. They vote logically, but they vote collectively in the same direction, and it produces very different outcomes. Yeah.
Okay, well, we're coming up to 8 o'clock and we actually have to depart this room at 8. So I'd like to thank you all for coming this evening. If you're interested in other events that the Centre is putting on, then please go onto the website and register for those. You'll get an automatic alert from our newsletter. And I'd just like to finish by thanking Herbert again for giving us such an entertaining evening. So thank you very much, Herbert.
Pleasure, thank you.